Welcome everyone. This is Llama from the First Turn. Today I've got something a little different for you. I've been working with the Kimera Kolors paints. As you know, we are an affiliate. You can get yours over at dracoya.com. Use the code FTG10 for 10% off. But what I wanted to do is try and show in a very simple way kind of how they perform. And this is just the base set, the original 13 paints, as well as a medium. And I've just got some watercolor paper here, as you can see, that I've drawn out a simple grid on. We've probably seen other artists do something similar. And right at the top there, I'm going to start with sort of the warm trio, the cold yellow, the warm yellow, and the orange. And I'm going to do them in a couple of stages. I'm going to take them straight out of the pot. I've just got them set up on a wet palette that is just off screen. The first line you're going to see, the first line across, they're not perfectly straight. This isn't a technical or technique or artistic video, really. It's just a pure use of the medium. The first line you're going to see at the top of each box is going to be the paint undiluted, straight from the pot, loaded on a brush, and applied. The one beneath that is going to be 1 part water to 3 parts paints, or about 25% dilution. The third one will be about a 50-50 mix of water to paint. And then the last one there, which will sort of be faded or glazed out, is like 3 parts water, maybe a little more, to 1 part paint. So this is just to show how these paints perform when used straight out of the pot or when diluted with simply water. And again, this is on watercolor paper, so it won't be exactly the same as how it performs on a miniature. But I think this is important. These paints have become pretty much my daily driver for a lot of miniature projects, but they do behave differently than a lot of the miniature paints we are all used to. You know, many people who got into the miniature painting hobby started with, Citadel, or Army Painter, or more recently, Pro Acryl by Monument Hobbies, or Two Thin Coats. Of course, there's Vallejo. Those paints that come in very friendly pot or dropper bottle sizes. They have a wide range of colors and they flow a very specific way. In a lot of cases, you can use them straight out of the pot, but those paints are mixed. They're pre-diluted, right? They're mixed with a lot of mediums, flow improvers, leveling agents, and in some cases also white paint, which may be a video I showcase later, how you can get that similar feel with your Kimera paints if that's what you so desire. But here this is pretty straightforward to show you the value of each when just diluted with water. After the 3 warm colors, I move into sort of the bold, deep colors, the red, which is one of my favorite reds of all time, the magenta, and then the violet. And those 3, as you can see, most of the paints so far do have considerable transparency. You can see that black line that I've drawn in there. You can still see it through even the undiluted paint until you get to the violet. And that one, let me tell you, that one just makes anything underneath it disappear. But that has value. But then it dilutes all the way down to almost a gentle lavender kind of color. It's really interesting to watch just how it behaves with water. The next 3 are sort of our seascape colors, which will be the phthalo blue green shade, the phthalo blue red shade, and the phthalo green. Now, those 2 phthalo blues straight out of the pot and onto the watercolor paper, you will see they don't look too different from one another. So much so that they're almost indistinguishable until you start diluting them, and then they show some variance. But they do mix a little differently, and that'll be another video I show at another time. But these are also some of my favorite ones to use. I love blues and greens and turquoises, so I get a lot of use out of those. The bottle caps of mine are all very messy. Finally, we have sort of the more neutral tones. We have the 2 oxides, red oxide and yellow oxide. And then we have, of course, the carbon black and the white. Now, the carbon black is in terms of blacks, it is absolutely my favorite. It has a very matte finish and yet is still very dark and has almost 100% opacity. Like it will completely cover whatever it goes over. And then when you dilute it, it becomes almost a gray, like a charcoal color. The yellow oxide is more or less like a yellow ochre. And then the red oxide is interesting. It's very much like a rust or a dried blood look. And it's also one of the most opaque of the paints. As you'll see throughout this process, a lot of them have some semblance of transparency, but the violet and that red oxide, and of course the carbon black, just absolutely cover whatever's underneath them when there's minimal dilution. The white is one of the more interesting ones. A lot of miniature painters struggle with white paint, and there's really a material reason for it. I mean, white paint tends to have larger pigment particles, and so it doesn't maneuver across the surface quite as smoothly, and then it can dry unevenly, giving it that sort of chalky feel. And people a lot of times will think, they must have had a bad white paint, or this brand just doesn't make a good one. But that's just the nature of white paint. It's only when you like heavily dilute them and mix them with other things that they become more smooth. And so you'll see a wide range. You have like bold titanium white from Proacryl, which is very popular. It's got great opacity. It's very bright. That's how this white for Kimera functions, is a lot like that one. Very bright, very opaque. But it will be uneven unless you do a little bit of dilution. In which case, then I found it can be very smooth. Whereas a white from, say, Two Thin Coats, like White Star, that one is, again, mixed with a lot of mediums and leveling agents, and so it's very thin. It almost performs like a white ink, like if you get an acrylic ink out of a bottle. So those just have different uses. But for this, I'm just showing you simply how the core 13 paints that come in the original Kimera Kolors base set behave straight out of the pot, and with just a little bit of varying degrees of dilutions with water. If this was at all helpful to you, be sure to continue to follow. We will be doing another one of these with the expansion set 1, and so that'll give you an idea of the sort of all of the core or base paints that they have, and we can give you a feel for how they perform straight out of the bottle, as well as once diluted with water. And hopefully that will be helpful to you. These paints do behave a little different than some of those common hobby brands, but once you kind of figure out their properties and how they behave, they're just this wonderful pigment-rich paint, and you get a lot of it in the bottle. So a little bit goes a really long way. Think of them more like an artist quality tube acrylic, where you put this thick sort of dollop of paint on your palette, and then you get to control how much of it you use. You really do. I don't recommend using them straight out of the pot because they will settle a little bit unevenly because they don't have all of those other chemicals in them. But you can. But yeah, you really get to control and how much you use, the dilution level, the opacity, the transparency, and then you can make a little bit go a really long way. So hope this was useful to you. We'll be back with more soon.